So this problem says, solve the equation using completing the square. Show your reasoning. So completing the square means that I want to turn this problem into something that is a perfect square. I want to turn this equation into something that is a perfect square so that I can square root the left side and then square root the right side. What that means is I'm going to take this equation and manipulate it. I'm going to do something to it to make it so that it's easy to square root both sides. It's not easy to do that right now. So that's why I'm going to complete the square to make it a perfect square. In order to do that, the best way for me to do that is to make my own number here that'll make this whole thing a perfect square. So I don't like this number being here. I'm going to get rid of it. In order to complete the square, the best way would be to make my own c so that I can have a number that works that I want, that makes the whole thing a perfect square. So I'm going to get rid of this 14 and put it over there. That way I can make my own number. So I'm going to minus 14 from both sides. This goes away. I'm left with 2x squared plus 16x equals negative 14. Okay, now I have something that I can manipulate a little bit better. However, I cannot do completing the square if there is something in front of x squared. A has to equal 1 for me to do completing the square. If I'm going to use that method, a has to be 1. So I can't have something in front of the x squared. I've got 2 in front of the x squared, so I've got to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that by dividing. But I'm going to divide everything, because whenever I divide one part of an equation, I have to divide the whole equation, right? Everybody has to get divided in order to keep this side equal to that side, so I divide everything by 2. So each term gets divided by 2. 2x squared divided by 2 is just x squared. 16x divided by 2 is just positive 8x. Negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. Okay, now everything looks right. My number's on one side, my variable's on the other, a is 1. Now I can make this number the perfect square I need it to be. So, in order to make it a perfect square, we gave the formula that c is going to be equal to whatever half of b was squared. That's how I make a perfect square. If a is 1, and I got rid of that c so I can make my own, then c is going to be half of b squared. So b is 8, right? 8 divided by 2 squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Square that, I get 16. So 16 would make this a perfect square. So I'm going to add 16 right here. But to keep my equation balanced, I must add 16 on the other side also. I'm left with x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 9. Now the great thing about doing that is that now I have a factor times itself that gives me this. So I can put this in factored form. The factored form is always going to be x plus whatever half of b was. b was 8, so positive 4 is going to be my factored form. And we know that's true because x plus 4 times x plus 4 will be x squared plus 4x plus 4x plus 16, which will be x squared plus 8x plus 16, which is the perfect square. That's why this works. So c will be b over 2 squared. That's always going to give me the number I need at the end to make the whole thing a perfect square. the factored form is going to be x plus whatever half of b was. And if you want to check it, you can check it to see that it works, because it did. So now I can solve this by square rooting. Because this is a square, I can get rid of that square by square rooting. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other side. Let's continue up top. A square and a square root cancel out. I'm left with x plus 4 equals, the square root of 9 is positive and negative 3, because 3 squared is 9. Negative 3 times negative 3 is also 9, so positive and negative 3. And so now I have an equation with two options. That means they each have to be their own equation. So x plus 4 equals positive 3, and x plus 4 equals negative 3. Now I just solve one-step equations. Minus 4 on both sides to get x by itself. X equals negative 1. Minus 4 on both sides to get x by itself. X equals negative 7. And those are my two solutions.